Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. Look, nobody ever said that working on a cargo hauler in the Outer Rim was going to be glamorous. The Nebula's Grace wasn't exactly a luxury cruise liner, more like a floating warehouse with engines strapped to it. The kind of ship that smelled permanently of recycled air, engine grease, and whatever mystery cuisine the cook was experimenting with that week. But it paid well, the routes were reliable, and if you kept your head down and did your job, you could make a decent living out here in the black. Lieutenant Amara Voss had been doing exactly that for the past 3 years. Human, mid-30s, with the kind of engineering expertise that made her invaluable, and the kind of personality that made her simultaneously respected and slightly feared. She didn't do small talk. She didn't do drama. She fixed things, filed her reports, and collected her paycheck. Simple. Except now, 3 months into a 6-month deep space cargo run, things were decidedly not simple. It started when she came back from emergency family leave. 2 weeks she'd been gone, unprecedented for someone as reliable as Amara. And when she returned, something was different. Not obviously different, mind you. She still showed up to her shifts on time, still worked with the same focused intensity, still spoke in that same clipped, efficient tone that suggested she had exactly zero patience for incompetence. But there was this backpack, a specially modified carrier, actually, strapped to her torso and back. Compact, insulated, with environmental controls that hummed softly if you got close enough to hear. The kind of thing you might use to transport sensitive equipment or biological samples. Completely reasonable for an engineer to have, really, except for the tiny hand that occasionally reached out from it, and the soft cooing sounds during quiet moments. And that one time during a briefing when everyone distinctly heard a sneeze, the unmistakably human, impossibly small sneeze of an infant. Captain Brontahar had been mid-sentence when it happened, discussing cargo schedules in his usual gravelly rumble. The Goliathan stood nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 massive arms and gray-blue skin that looked like it could deflect small arms fire. He'd been a cargo captain for 2 decades, had seen just about everything the galaxy could throw at a ship, and prided himself on running a tight, regulation-compliant operation. He stopped talking. One of his 4 hands froze mid-gesture. His deep-set eyes, small for his species but unnervingly perceptive, fixed on Amara's midsection where the carrier rested against her chest. The entire bridge went silent. Amara's face remained perfectly neutral, like she was carved from stone. Her hand drifted almost imperceptibly to rest on the carrier, but otherwise she didn't move, didn't blink, didn't acknowledge that anything unusual had occurred. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 seconds. Then, Brontahar cleared his throat, a sound like boulders grinding together, and continued exactly where he'd left off. Which means we'll need to recalibrate the cargo bay pressure before we hit the 3rd checkpoint. And that was that. From that moment on, an unspoken agreement settled over the crew of the Nebula's Grace like cosmic dust. They were going to pretend they didn't notice. Now, you have to understand, this wasn't just turning a blind eye to someone sneaking extra rations or fudging their shift hours. This was a full-blown, career-ending, get blacklisted from every major shipping corporation in the galaxy violation of company policy. Regulation 3.18, subsection B, paragraph 9, no unauthorized passengers, dependents, or non-essential personnel permitted aboard corporate vessels during contracted routes. The penalty? Immediate termination, Forfeiture of all accumulated benefits. Permanent flag in your employment record. The kind of thing that didn't just end your career, it vaporized it. And yet, here was Amara, walking around with what was clearly, obviously, unmistakably, an 8-month-old human infant strapped to her chest. And the entire crew was engaging in the most elaborate act of collective denial since someone tried to convince the galaxy that Betelgeuse wasn't about to go supernova. It was almost impressive, really. Melrisa was the second to notice, or at least the second to make the choice not to notice. The Luminian navigator spent most of her time in the sensor suite, her crystalline body refracting the light from dozens of displays into rainbow patterns across the walls. Luminans didn't have faces in the traditional sense, more like facets that caught and reflected light, but they communicated through musical tones that somehow conveyed meaning more clearly than most species managed with actual words. She was running a routine navigation check when Amara came in to repair a faulty sensor relay. The work required Amara to crawl into a maintenance shaft that was, generously speaking, not designed for someone wearing an infant carrier. For 10 minutes, Melrisa listened to the sounds of Amara grunting, adjusting straps, and occasionally whispering things like, "Just hold still, Tommy. I know, almost done," in that particular tone that every sentient species seems to use when talking to their young. When Amara finally emerged, slightly sweaty, and with what looked suspiciously like a tiny drool stain on her shoulder, Melrisa simply chimed a pleasant 3-note acknowledgement and went back to her calculations. She didn't ask about the name Tommy. She didn't ask about the muffled gurgling sounds coming from the carrier. She especially didn't ask about the small cloth item that had fallen out of Amara's pocket. Unmistakably, a baby's sock, impossibly tiny and decorated with little rockets. Instead, Melrisa made a mental note to adjust the environmental controls in the sections where Amara worked most. Frequently. Nothing dramatic. Just a slight temperature increase, somewhere around 22 degrees Celsius. The kind of temperature that human infants, hypothetically, if there were any aboard, which there definitely weren't, would find comfortable. By the end of the first week, everyone knew. How could they not? The Nebula's Grace had a crew of 18, and in the close quarters of a long-haul cargo ship, secrets lasted about as long as fresh food. Gnarl, the security chief, found out when he was doing his routine patrol of the engineering deck at 300 hours. The Suresh had 6 eyes arranged around his reptilian head, giving him nearly 360-degree vision, an evolutionary advantage from his species' predator-filled homeworld, and extremely useful for security work. He rounded a corner and stopped dead in his tracks. Amara was there, sitting on the floor of a maintenance corridor, her back against the wall. The carrier was open, and she was holding Tommy, feeding him a bottle while simultaneously reading a technical manual propped against her knees. Her eyes were half closed with exhaustion, and she was humming something soft and tuneless. It was, objectively, the most blatant violation of company policy Gnarl had ever witnessed. As security chief, his job was to report this, immediately. It wasn't personal. It was protocol. That's what protocols were for. He stood there, all 6 eyes taking in the scene. The tiny human infant, no bigger than Gnarl's forearm. The dark circles under Amara's eyes. The way she held the baby with practiced care, even while she was clearly running on fumes. The half-eaten ration bar beside her that looked like it was her first meal of the day, and it was past midnight. Gnarl had been in security for 15 years. He'd busted smugglers, broken up fights, detained unauthorized boarders. He was good at his job. He followed the rules. He turned around and walked away. If anyone asked, he'd say his patrol of that section had been unremarkable. Nothing to report. all quiet. He didn't sleep particularly well that night, but then again, security chiefs rarely did. The thing about the crew's collective denial was that it required an increasingly absurd level of coordination as the weeks went on. Because Tommy, and yes, everyone knew his name by now, even though nobody acknowledged knowing his name, was a baby. And babies, as it turns out, do not care about company policy or career-ending violations. They cry. They make noises. They have needs that occur at spectacularly inconvenient times. During a routine status meeting with the regional shipping coordinator, a video call that could have gone extremely badly, Tommy decided to contribute his thoughts on cargo redistribution procedures. His contribution took the form of a loud gurgling sound, followed by what could only be described as a raspberry. The crew's response was nothing short of coordinated genius. Brontahar immediately started coughing, a thunderous sound that echoed through the bridge. Simultaneously, Melarisa triggered a harmonic feedback burst from her console that created a brief, high-pitched whine. Ragna, the Aquarian cook who'd wandered onto the bridge to deliver some food, knocked over a tray with her tentacles, sending dishes clattering. The cacophony lasted exactly long enough to mask the sound of an infant. The regional coordinator looked confused, asked if everything was all right, and Brontahar assured him in his gravelly voice that they were experiencing some minor equipment malfunctions. Nothing serious. All under control. Amara stood perfectly still in the background, her hand resting casually on the carrier, her face betraying absolutely nothing. After the call ended, nobody said a word. Brontahar went back to his captain's chair. Melarisa returned to her navigation calculations. Ragna cleaned up her mess and headed back to the galley. But as Amara turned to leave the bridge, Brontahar's eyes tracked her movement. Just for a moment. And if you'd been watching very carefully, you might have seen the tiniest twitch at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Goliathans didn't really do smiles, but something close to one. By month 2, the absurdity had reached new heights. Amara was changing a diaper in a supply closet when the ship's first officer nearly walked in. The door wasn't locked, couldn't be, due to safety regulations, and the sound of approaching footsteps gave her approximately 3 seconds of warning. In those 3 seconds, Amara managed to finish the diaper change, bundle Tommy back into the carrier, zip it closed, stuff the used diaper into a sealed bag, and pretend to be checking inventory on her datapad. The first officer poked his head in, grunted something about needing more filter components, and left. Amara stood there for a full minute afterward, her heart pounding, before she allowed herself to breathe. This couldn't last. She knew it couldn't last. Eventually, someone would report her. Eventually, a surprise inspection would catch her. Eventually, her luck would run out. But what choice did she have? The thought kept her awake at night, during the few hours she managed to sleep. The memory played on loop. The call from station security, the sympathetic but bureaucratic tone as they informed her that her sister had been killed in a transport accident. The paperwork. The funeral she couldn't afford. The moment she'd held Tommy for the first time as his only living relative, this tiny human who'd lost his mother and had a father who'd never been in the picture to begin with. She'd looked into foster care, station facilities where she could leave him while she worked. The thought of it made her physically ill. Those places were overcrowded, understaffed, and while they were better than nothing, they were barely better than nothing. Kids fell through the cracks. Kids got lost in the system. Kids grew up knowing nobody had wanted them enough to keep them. She couldn't do that to Tommy. She couldn't. But she also couldn't quit her job. The salary from the Nebula's grace was the only thing keeping them afloat. Single-parent support on the stations was a joke, and the waiting list for affordable housing was measured in years. Without this job, they'd end up in some overcrowded shelter, maybe get separated anyway by social services, who'd deem her incapable of caring for an infant without stable income. So she'd made an impossible choice. She'd brought him aboard, she'd hidden him, and she'd hoped, desperately, against all logic, that she could somehow make it work. The crew, bless them or curse them depending on your perspective, had become unwitting accomplices to this doomed endeavor. And the truly insane part? They seemed to be okay with it. Ragna started leaving meals near Amara's workstation. Not obviously, just forgetting a nutrient-rich plate in places where Amara happened to be working. Meals that were suspiciously well-balanced with the extra calories a nursing mother needed. Not that Ragna would have any way of knowing such a thing. Not that she'd been researching human postpartum nutrition in her spare time. Absolutely not. Melriza's coincidental timing became almost comical. Whenever Tommy got fussy, and babies get fussy, that's just what they do. The Luminian navigator would somehow need to walk past Amara's location, and her crystalline body would just happen to refract light in those soothing rhythmic patterns. And she'd just happen to emit those low, harmonic tones that seemed to calm Tommy down immediately. Pure coincidence. Obviously. Gnarl took to adjusting his patrol routes. If corporate sent any surprise inspection notices, and they did, occasionally, he somehow always knew about them first, and Amara would suddenly receive emergency maintenance requests that needed her immediate attention in the most remote sections of the ship. Sections that were conveniently far from wherever the inspectors would be looking. Just efficient resource management. Nothing more. Even Brontahar, the by-the-book captain who ran his ship with military precision, started making subtle adjustments. Shift schedules got tweaked. Break times got extended. The duty roster somehow always ensured Amara wasn't scheduled during the times when Tommy would most likely need attention. All completely random, of course. Just the natural ebb and flow of ship operations. Nobody talked about it. Nobody acknowledged it. But the protection was real, and it was deliberate. And Amara knew it, even if she couldn't say it. Late at night, during the quiet hours when Tommy finally slept, and the ship hummed its endless song through the void, Amara would stand in the observation deck and stare out at the stars. She'd think about her sister, about the crew, about the precarious house of cards she was living in, and she'd wonder how much longer it could possibly last before everything came crashing down. The daily routine aboard the Nebula's Grace had taken on a quality that could only be described as controlled chaos, masquerading as normalcy, which, honestly, was pretty much how most long-haul cargo operations functioned anyway, but now with the added excitement of an unauthorized infant. Amara's typical day started at 600 hours. Tommy, bless his tiny heart, had not received the memo about shift schedules and continued to operate on his own mysterious timeline. This meant Amara was usually already awake by 0430, having been roused by hunger cries or diaper emergencies or just the general opinion of an 8-month-old that sleep was for the weak. By the time she reported for duty, she'd already changed 2 diapers, nursed Tommy, attempted to make herself look like a functional adult, and consumed enough coffee to power a small shuttle. The carrier went on, carefully adjusted, straps checked 3 times, and off they went to keep a cargo hauler running. The engineering deck became her stage for an increasingly elaborate performance. She'd be elbow-deep in a plasma relay, recalibrating flow rates while simultaneously bouncing slightly to keep Tommy content. She'd review diagnostic reports with one hand while the other patted a tiny back, coaxing up burps between status updates. She'd crawl through maintenance shafts designed for one person while accommodating two, whispering apologies to Tommy for the tight squeeze, and promising him that yes, when he was older, she'd explain why Aunt Amara's job sometimes required pretending to be a contortionist. The exhaustion was real. The kind of bone-deep, soul-crushing tiredness that made you forget what day it was or whether you'd already eaten lunch. Amara ran on caffeine, stubbornness, and the sheer terror of what would happen if she failed, at her job or at keeping Tommy safe. But here's the thing about impossible situations. Sometimes they reveal what people are actually made of. Take the incident with the waste reclamation system. It failed on a Wednesday, or maybe it was a Monday. Time got weird out here, and the backup systems weren't kicking in properly. This was the kind of problem that needed immediate attention, unless everyone wanted to find out what happens when a ship's sanitation systems stop working in 0G. Spoiler alert, nothing good. Amara was in the middle of nursing Tommy when the alert came through. She had maybe 10 minutes before the situation went from urgent to catastrophic. She looked down at Tommy, who was contentedly doing his thing, completely unaware that the ship's plumbing crisis was extremely poor timing. "Okay, buddy," she whispered. "Speed round. Let's go." She got him situated back in the carrier in record time, grabbed her toolkit, and made it to the reclamation junction in under 3 minutes. The problem was obvious. A pressure valve had blown, and the automated replacement hadn't seated properly. Simple fix. 15 minutes of work. Tops. Except Tommy chose that exact moment to decide that he was done with the carrier and would like to voice his complaints. Loudly. Amara worked faster, her hands moving on autopilot while she murmured soothing nonsense. I know, this is boring, but Aunt Amara really needs to fix this before everyone on the ship has a very bad day. And then we'll read that book with the space whales you like, okay? Okay." That's when Brontahar showed up. The Goliathan captain had to duck to fit through the doorway, his massive frame filling the corridor. He looked at Amara, at the disassembled valve components, at the carrier where Tommy was working up to a full meltdown, and at the growing pressure readings on the display. "Problem?" His voice was pure gravel. "Under control, sir," Amara said, not looking up, her hands steady even as sweat dripped down her face. "Just need another 8 minutes." Brontahar grunted. Then he did something Amara didn't expect. He sat down. Well, sat was generous. He kind of folded his enormous body into a corner, which was like watching a mountain try to fit into a closet. And then, with his deep, rumbling voice, he started talking. Just casual conversation about the cargo manifest, about the route, about absolutely nothing important. But the timbre of his voice, low, steady, rhythmic, had an effect. Tommy's crying tapered off, then stopped. Amara risked a glance and saw that Tommy was staring at Brontahar with wide eyes, apparently fascinated by this enormous creature making sounds like distant thunder. "You were saying about the pressure valve?" Brontahar prompted, still in that same even tone. Amara blinked, then turned back to her work. "Right. Pressure valve. The seal was compromised, probably from the temperature fluctuations we had last week." She finished the repair in 6 minutes instead of 8. The system came back online smoothly. Crisis averted. Brontahar stood up, or rather unfolded himself, and glanced at the now quiet Tommy, who was still watching him with rapt attention. "Good work, Lieutenant," he said. Then he walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Amara stood there, covered in grime and sweat, holding her toolkit in one hand, the other resting on Tommy's back. The captain had just sat and talked to distract her baby while she saved the ship's plumbing. And they were both going to pretend it hadn't happened. The absurdity would have made her laugh if she weren't so close to crying. The support system that had emerged was as unspoken as it was essential. Melrisa had taken to doing her navigation calculations near wherever Amara was working. Her presence alone seemed to help. The harmonic frequencies she naturally produced were like a lullaby to Tommy. The Luminian never commented on it, but Amara noticed that Tommy's fussy periods got shorter and shorter whenever Melrisa was around. One time, Amara walked into the galley to find Ragna manipulating 3 different pots with her tentacles, creating something that smelled incredible. The Aquarians species didn't eat solid food. They absorbed nutrients through their skin in specialized tanks. But Ragna had become obsessed with cooking for other species. Protein synthesis optimized for human lactation, Ragna said, without preamble, not even turning around. Higher calcium content, added iron, folate. Amara froze. That was the closest anyone had come to actually acknowledging the situation out loud. Ragna continued stirring, her tentacles moving in hypnotic patterns. Hypothetically, if there were a nursing human on board, which there isn't, obviously, but if there were, this would be the nutritional profile they'd need. Hypothetically. Hypothetically, Amara repeated, her throat tight. The portion is in the warmer, Ragna said. Logged as standard crew meal. Nothing unusual, just make sure whoever this hypothetical person is eats it while it's hot. Nutrition is important. Amara took the meal back to her quarters. She ate every bite, and she didn't cry, because if she started, she might not stop. Gnarl's contribution was less nutritional and more tactical. The Saurish had apparently decided that his job description now included early warning system for potential disasters. He'd somehow hacked into the corporate communication network, which was definitely illegal and definitely something Amara was pretending not to know about, and monitored for any inspection notices or surprise audits. When word came through that a safety inspector would be boarding at their next supply stop, Gnarl made sure Amara knew about it 4 days in advance. Plenty of time to make contingency plans. Plenty of time to prepare hiding spots or alternative explanations or whatever was needed. The inspector arrived, checked the safety equipment, reviewed some logs, and left without incident. Mostly because Amara had spent the entire inspection period in the lower cargo hold, doing routine maintenance on systems that didn't actually need routine maintenance, with Tommy strapped to her back, and both of them holding very, very still. When she emerged 3 hours later, Gnarl was waiting. He handed her a bottle of water without a word, then walked away. The close calls kept coming, each one a reminder of how precarious their situation was. A surprise video call from corporate during Tommy's nap time, which would have been fine except Tommy woke up and started crying. Brontahar had turned up the bridge speakers, claiming they were testing the emergency broadcast system, while Amara speed-walked out. A client meeting where Tommy sneezed at exactly the wrong moment, covered by Melrisa's sudden calibration adjustment that created a burst of static. A maintenance inspection where the inspector nearly opened a supply locker that Amara had been using as an impromptu changing station, redirected by Gnarl, who claimed that particular locker was having a security seal malfunction and was off-limits, pending repairs. Each incident was a thread pulled from a tapestry that was already unraveling. Each one brought them closer to the inevitable moment when the whole charade would collapse. But that moment hadn't come yet, and until it did, Amara would keep working, keep hiding, and keep hoping that somehow, impossibly, she could make it to the end of this voyage with both her career and her nephew intact. She was working on a malfunctioning environmental sensor when Tommy grabbed a fistful of her hair and yanked, giggling at her yelp of pain. She gently extracted his fingers, kissed his tiny hand, and went back to her repairs. 3 more months. Just 3 more months until they made port. 3 more months of living on borrowed time, protected by a crew that was pretending not to protect her. It couldn't last, but she'd take every day she could get. Month 3 brought the kind of disaster that made all previous problems look like minor inconveniences. The spatial anomaly appeared without warning, which was pretty much how spatial anomalies worked, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. One moment, the nebula's Grace was cruising along its predetermined route. The next, every alarm on the ship started screaming, and the entire vessel lurched sideways like someone had grabbed it and shaken it. Amara was thrown against a bulkhead, her arms instinctively wrapping around Tommy's carrier to protect him. Sparks erupted from a nearby console. The lights flickered, went out, then came back on in emergency red. "All hands, secure stations." Brontahar's voice boomed through the intercom. "We've hit some kind of gravimetric distortion. Engineering, I need a status report now." Amara was already moving, one hand keeping Tommy stable, while the other pulled up diagnostics on her handheld. What she saw made her blood run cold. The quantum drive had taken massive damage. Not the kind of damage you could patch with spare parts and elbow grease. The kind of damage that meant they were stranded in deep space, weeks from the nearest station, with no way to move faster than conventional thrusters, which, at their current location, meant it would take them approximately 6 months to reach help. They didn't have 6 months of supplies. She made it to the bridge in record time, Tommy mercifully quiet against her chest, perhaps sensing the urgency in her movements. "Talk to me," Brontahar demanded. Amara pulled up the damage assessment on the main display. Quantum drive core is fractured. The containment field is degrading. If it fails completely, we're looking at a cascading collapse that could take out half the ship's systems. "Can you fix it?" "Yes." She pulled up the schematics, her mind already racing through the repair sequence. "But it requires working in the drive chamber during the stabilization process. Full containment suit. Radiation exposure will be significant, even with shielding." "How long?" "Minimum 10 hours. Continuous work." "I can't stop. Once I start, or the containment protocols won't hold." The bridge went quiet. Everyone understood what she wasn't saying. 10 hours. In a radiation-heavy environment, wearing a full containment suit that wouldn't accommodate an infant carrier. For the first time since this whole impossible situation began, there was no way to pretend, no way to work around it, no clever solution that let her keep Tommy with her. Amara felt the weight of every eye on the bridge, felt the moment stretching out like taffy, felt the choice crystallizing in front of her, the ship or Tommy. Except it wasn't really a choice, was it? If she didn't make the repair, everyone died, including Tommy. "I need someone to watch him," she said quietly. The words felt like they were being dragged out of her. "I can't take him into the drive chamber." The silence was deafening. This was it. The moment where someone would finally say it out loud, would finally acknowledge what they'd all been pretending not to see. The moment where everything would come crashing down. Brontahar stood up from his captain's chair. All 4 of his arms moved in what might have been a gesture of decision, or maybe just stretching. He walked toward Amara with those heavy footsteps that seemed to shake the deck. He stopped in front of her, looked down at her with those small, perceptive eyes, then looked at the carrier where Tommy was peeking out, his tiny face curious about all the commotion. "The cub stays with us," Brontahar said. His voice was absolutely level, completely matter-of-fact, like he was discussing cargo manifests. "You fix the ship." Amara's breath caught. "Captain, We have it handled, Lieutenant." He turned to address the rest of the bridge. "Melarisa, clear my quarters. Ragna, I need you up here. Gnarl, pull up everything in the database about human infant care. We're going to need it." They moved like they'd been planning this, like they'd been waiting for this moment. Which, Amara realized with a shock, they probably had been. Melarisa chimed a series of rapid notes, acknowledgement and determination. Gnarl was already at a console, his multiple eyes scanning through files. Ragna emerged from somewhere, her tentacles moving with purpose. "We've been preparing," Ragna said, addressing Amara directly. "We're not completely ignorant. We've studied. We've learned. We've been ready." "You... what?" Amara's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Did you think we were blind?" Gnarl's raspy voice held something that might have been amusement. "We've been researching human infant care for 6 weeks. Nutritional needs, sleep patterns, safety protocols. We pooled our knowledge." Brontahar reached out with one massive hand, and Amara instinctively stepped back before realizing he was offering to take Tommy. "We've got him, Lieutenant. Go save our ship." The dam broke. 3 months of holding everything together, of staying strong, of pretending she could handle this alone. It all came crashing down. Tears streamed down her face as she carefully unstrapped the carrier, her hands shaking. "He likes it when you hum," she said, her voice breaking. "Low tones. He needs to eat every 3 hours. I pumped enough milk for the day. It's in the cold storage unit in my quarters, section B12. He's teething, so he might be fussy. There's a gel in the med kit that helps. He likes being bounced gently, not too fast. He's scared of loud, sudden noises, but okay with constant background noise. Amara." Brontahar's use of her first name stopped her rambling. "We know. We've been watching. We've been learning. He'll be safe." She lifted Tommy out of the carrier. He looked up at her with those wide, trusting eyes, and she nearly lost it completely. "I'll be back soon, buddy. I promise. These are friends. They're going to take care of you." She handed him to Brontahar. The captain's enormous hands cradled Tommy with shocking gentleness, like he was holding the most precious cargo in the galaxy. Which, to Amara, he absolutely was. Tommy looked up at the massive Goliathan, didn't cry, just reached out one tiny hand and grabbed onto one of Brontahar's fingers. The captain's expression softened in a way Amara had never seen. "Go," he said quietly. "We've got him." Amara turned and walked toward the engineering deck before she could change her mind, before the fear could paralyze her, before she could think too hard about leaving Tommy with a crew of aliens who'd been pretending not to notice him for 3 months. She suited up in the containment gear, ran through the safety checks twice, and entered the quantum drive chamber. The radiation counters immediately started climbing. The temperature was oppressive, even through the suit. The work ahead was delicate, dangerous, and absolutely critical. She activated her comm. Beginning repair sequence, starting with containment field stabilization. From the bridge, Brontahar's voice came through. "Acknowledged. We'll keep you updated on our end." There was a pause, then she heard it. Soft, in the background of the comm channel. Tommy, making his happy, babbling sounds. And underneath that, Brontahar's rumbling voice, humming something low and rhythmic. Amara smiled behind her helmet and got to work. Time became meaningless in the drive chamber. Hours blended together in a haze of technical precision and radiation warnings. Her hands moved through the repair sequence, guided by years of training and sheer necessity. Replace this component. Recalibrate this setting. Reinforce this connection. Through it all, her comm stayed open. She could hear them, her crew, her impossible, wonderful crew, taking care of Tommy. Melrisa sang crystalline lullabies. Gnarl made ridiculous noises that somehow made Tommy giggle. Ragna reported feeding times with the precision of a military operation. And Brontahar, the gruff captain who ran his ship by the book, narrated everything in that deep, soothing rumble. He's trying to grab Gnarl's tail. Gnarl's pretending to be annoyed, but he's wagging it deliberately. Now, Melrisa is refracting light patterns. The small human appears fascinated. He's reaching for the colors. Amara worked and listened and realized something that made her chest tight. She'd been so focused on protecting Tommy, on keeping him hidden, on not being a burden, that she'd failed to see what was right in front of her. This crew hadn't just been tolerating Tommy's presence. They'd fallen for him too. Hour 8. Amara's hands were cramping inside the containment suit gloves. Her back ached from the awkward positions required to access the drive core's inner components. The radiation counter kept beeping its cheerful warnings about exposure levels that were technically safe, but definitely not recommended for extended periods. She was almost done. The containment field was stabilizing. The quantum matrix was realigning. Another 90 minutes, and the drive would be operational again? Through the comm, she heard Tommy crying. Not the angry cry or the hungry cry. The tired, overwhelmed cry of a baby who'd had enough of the day and wanted his person. "We've tried everything," Ragna's voice came through, sounding genuinely distressed. "He's fed, changed, not too hot or cold. He just wants you." Amara's hands paused mid-calibration. The desire to abandon the repair and go to him was almost physical. But she couldn't. Not yet. "Sing to him," she said, her voice rough. "The song I always sing. I'll do it with you." And there, in a radiation-flooded quantum drive chamber, while performing repairs that required absolute precision, Amara started singing a lullaby. Her voice was tired and off-key and completely unsuited for the environment. On the bridge, Brontahar picked up the melody. His deep bass voice carried the tune in a way that made it sound almost ceremonial. Melrisa added harmonic overtones. Even Gnarl attempted something that was technically closer to humming than singing, but got points for effort. The crew of the Nebula's Grace sang a human lullaby to a human infant, while a human engineer saved all their lives. Tommy's crying quieted, then stopped. "He's asleep," Brontahar reported softly. "Don't stop singing." So they didn't. They sang that lullaby 3 more times while Amara finished the repair. And when she finally sealed the last connection and watched the quantum drive core pulse back to life with stable readings across the board, she heard something she'd never expected to hear in her entire career. The crew of the Nebula's Grace cheered, not for the successful repair, but because Tommy had started clapping his tiny hands together, delighted by all the noise. Amara stripped off the containment suit, ran through decontamination that felt like it took years, and sprinted to the bridge. She burst through the doors, and there was Tommy, cradled in Brontahar's arms, reaching for her with both hands. She took him, held him close, buried her face in his hair, and just breathed. He smelled like baby soap and that indefinable Tommy smell, and he was safe and whole, and— "Lieutenant Amara." Brontahar's voice was serious. She looked up, still clutching Tommy, and felt her stomach drop. Here it came. The conversation they'd been avoiding. The moment where reality reasserted itself and policies and regulations and consequences caught up with them all. "Captain, He held up one massive hand. "We need to talk, all of us. But first, you need to rest. That's an order." The next few hours passed in a blur. Amara slept with Tommy curled against her. Both of them crashed out from exhaustion and stress. When she woke, there was a message on her console. "Report to the captain's quarters when able." She fed Tommy, changed him, and headed to what felt like an execution. The entire senior crew was there. Brontahar, Melrisa, Narl, Ragna. They all looked at her as she entered. Tommy once again strapped to her chest in the carrier. "Sit," Brontahar said, gesturing to a chair that had been brought in specifically because his quarters didn't normally accommodate human-sized furniture. She sat, waited for the axe to fall. "We've discussed the situation," the captain began, "and we've reached a consensus." Here it comes, Amara thought. The report to corporate. The termination. We're not reporting this to the company. Amara blinked. "What?" "We should," Brontahar continued. "By every regulation, protocol, and policy, we should. But we're not going to." "I don't understand." Narl leaned forward, his multiple eyes focusing on her. "What you did, bringing him aboard, hiding him, it was against every rule. It was dangerous. It was reckless." He paused. "It was also the only choice you had that let you keep your family together." "We've all made that calculation," Ragna added quietly. "Family versus regulations. We know which side we're on." Melrisa chimed in, her tones conveying warmth. "You didn't ask us to lie for you. You didn't demand our help. You tried to handle an impossible situation alone. That says something about your character." "But you also saved this ship," Brontahar said. "You went into that drive chamber knowing you had to leave him. Knowing that was the hardest thing you'd ever done. You did it anyway because lives depended on it. That says even more." Amara's eyes were burning. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing." The captain's expression was unreadable. "We have 3 months left on this run. When we make port, the company will receive our report. That report will document the spatial anomaly, the drive damage, and your exceptional repair work. It will not mention any unauthorized passengers." "Captain, however," he continued, cutting her off, "this arrangement is not sustainable long-term. Which brings me to the interesting part of this meeting." He pulled up a communication log on the display. Amara's blood ran cold when she saw the corporate header. 4 weeks ago, Brontahar said calmly, the company received a routine report from our ship. That report accidentally included background audio. Audio that clearly contained the sounds of an infant. The room tilted. Amara's grip on Tommy tightened. "What?" "I submitted that report," Narl said, not sounding remotely apologetic. "The audio inclusion was deliberate." Why would you?" "Because regulations don't change unless someone forces the issue," Brontahar said. "And because the CEO of this company is someone who understands that sometimes the rules are wrong." He tapped the display, and a new message appeared. Amara read it once, then again because the first time couldn't possibly be real. The message was from the CEO herself. It outlined a new company initiative, the Dependent Support Protocol, a pilot program allowing crew members with emergency dependents to bring them aboard under specific circumstances, provisions for childcare support, adjusted scheduling, modified quarters, and at the bottom, Lieutenant Amara and Dependent Tommy approved as pilot program participants, effective immediately. I don't. Amara couldn't form words. She knew? For 4 weeks? She's been monitoring the situation, Brontahar confirmed, watching how we handled it, watching how you handled it, using our experience to build the framework for the new policy. She's a former single mother herself, Ragna added. Lost her partner during a cargo run 20 years ago. Raised her kid while working her way up from engineer to CEO. She gets it. Your case proved something important, Melarisa chimed, that having family aboard doesn't weaken crew bonds. It strengthens them. Amara looked around at these aliens, these wonderful, impossible, ridiculous aliens who'd risked their careers to protect her, who'd learned how to care for a human infant just in case, who'd sung lullabies in a combination of languages that shouldn't work, but somehow did. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't have better words than that. But thank you." "The cub is packed now," Brontahar said simply. "That's how it works." The remaining 3 months of the voyage passed in a way that felt almost mundane compared to the first 3. The difference was that now nobody had to pretend. Tommy became an unofficial crew member. He had his own designation in the ship's roster. Dependent 001. He had scheduled feeding times that appeared on the duty logs. He had his own small sleep pod installed in Amara's quarters, provided by the company as part of the pilot program. The crew treated him like he'd always been there, because in a way, he had. Brontahar discovered that Tommy found his 4-armed shadow puppet shows absolutely hilarious. The captain could often be found in the galley during breaks, entertaining the infant with elaborate shapes, while pretending he wasn't completely smitten. Melarisa created a mobile for Tommy's sleep pod, crystalline shapes that refracted light into dancing rainbows. Tommy would stare at it for hours, transfixed, occasionally reaching up to try to grab the colors. Gnarl taught Tommy the fine art of peekaboo, using his multiple eyes to maximum comedic effect. The sight of a heavily armed reptilian security chief playing children's games while making silly faces was something nobody had on their bingo card, but here they were. Ragna developed an entire catalog of human infant nutrition, including recipes for when Tommy was old enough to start solid foods. She'd already planned out the next 3 months of his dietary development with the kind of precision usually reserved for military campaigns. When the Nebula's Grace finally made port, 6 months to the day after they'd departed, a small crowd had gathered. Word of the pilot program had spread through the shipping network. Other crew members with dependents, single parents trying to make it work, families separated by policy and circumstance. They wanted to see if it was real, if change was actually possible. Amara walked down the ramp with Tommy, now a wobbly toddler who insisted on trying to walk everywhere, strapped to her back. Behind her, the crew of the Nebula's Grace followed. Brontahar carried Tommy's gear, his 4 arms making light work of the load. Melarisa had created a going-away gift, a small crystalline figure that would grow with Tommy, changing colors as he aged. Gnarl had compiled a security protocol guide for small humans in starship environments that was both practical and hilariously overprotective. Ragna had prepared enough frozen meals to last them a month planet-side. At the base of the ramp, the CEO waited. She was shorter than Amara expected, with gray hair and eyes that had seen a lot of space. She looked at Tommy, then at Amara, then at the crew standing together like a united front. "How did it go?" the CEO asked. Amara thought about the answer. About 3 months of hiding and 3 months of honesty. About the exhaustion and the fear and the moments of joy. About a crew that had chosen loyalty over regulations and kindness over convenience. "We made it work," she said simply. The CEO smiled. "Good, because you're going back out in 2 weeks, and we've got 6 more families waiting to join the program. Think your crew is ready?" Brontahar stepped forward. "The Nebula's Grace is a family ship now. We're ready." And they were. 2 weeks later, they departed on another 6-month run. This time, Tommy had his own official crew designation. This time, there were 3 other families aboard, tentative and hopeful and terrified. This time, nobody had to pretend. Amara stood on the observation deck, watching the stars stretch and blur as they jumped to quantum speed. Tommy was strapped to her back, pointing at the lights and making excited sounds. Behind her, she heard the crew. Brontahar was explaining something to one of the new parents about shift scheduling. Melrisa was teaching a 2-year-old the musical tones for different star types. Gnarl was conducting a safety briefing that included a section on preventing small humans from accessing unauthorized areas. She'd thought she was alone. She'd thought she had to hide, to protect, to shoulder everything herself. She'd been wrong. Sometimes, the pack takes care of the cub. And sometimes, the cub reminds the pack what they're really working for. Amara adjusted Tommy's carrier, smiled at his delighted babbling, and headed back to engineering. They had a ship to run, a family to protect, and stars to chase. And they were going to do it together.